Welcome back to another episode of Writer's Block. I am your host, as always, Journal Staff Writer Sean Reider, and today is a very special pod. We are, at the time of recording, 1 week away from the start of fall camp, training camp, simply camp, whatever you want to call it. UNM football will be back on the practice field, ready to go. We finally have some real live football, even if it's just in a practice format, even if they're just in shells and helmets, to finally watch, analyze, break down. Thrilled to be back doing it again, of course. I love fall camp. The first 2 to 3 weeks of fall camp are honestly one of my favorite parts of the year in terms of covering players. I've always found that spring ball, I've kind of held back a lot of definitive statements about what this team is going to be, what they're not going to be, and part of that was because of the spring portal, and they might have added guys or lost guys, and part of it was, it's spring ball. I mean, it does mean something, but it's not the end-all, be-all. But fall camp, to me, that's when you start to make those definitive statements, those definitive takes, and kind of really get into the weeds of things and what this team is going to look like. Of course, this is a big fall camp because it's a big season ahead for UNM. I mean, they are one of the favorites to win the Mountain West, contend for, in the history of the program, their first conference title since 1964, of course, under second-year head coach Jason Eck. They have 14 returning starters from last year. Technically 13. Abe Williams is not playing cornerback anymore, and he was starting at cornerback, so it's really more 13. But they got a lot of guys back and a lot of continuity. That's why I'm high on them heading into this season. It's why I think they will contend for a Mountain West championship. And there's a lot of hype. I've never seen this kind of build up to a season, to camp or anything like that. But there are some questions about this team that they do need to address over fall camp and really probably throughout the course of the season. And I did want to run through a couple of them today, just as kind of a primer to get you ready for fall camp. Probably the biggest question, the one that always gets the most attention. In my first 2 years in the beat, it really wasn't much of a question. Last year, it was a bit of a question, albeit there was a little bit of a sense of you probably knew which way it was going to go. This year, I think, is a little bit different. That big question, of course, is who will start at quarterback. The competition I am expecting to see, Jack Lane, last year's starter who did not fully participate in spring ball. He is basically the leader heading into the competition. He will compete with James Lobstein, who competed with Lane for the starting job during fall camp last year. Luke Moga, a former 4-star Oregon transfer, highly touted recruit, dual threat skill set. First year, obviously, first fall camp, first season at UNM. And then Toa Fave, who was a true freshman last season, entering his true sophomore season. He ended last season as UNM's third-string quarterback. X said Lane is the leader going in, as I mentioned, which isn't much of a surprise. This was always going to be his job to lose after a season that saw him, play really well in some spots, but also struggle in some other spots. Number one thing about Lane that I've always kind of said on this show, on the live show, on other shows I've gone on and even written about, he is a guy that maybe doesn't have, a ton of incredible God-given talent in the way that you might think of coming from the way that you might think a highly touted quarterback might have. But he's always been a good decision maker. He's really, really smart with the football for the most part, and he knows his offense inside and out. I mean, this is, I believe, his 4th year. I might have that wrong, playing in this system. Actually, no. This will be his 5th season playing in the system. So he is a guy that definitely has a ton of experience. Of course, he was the starter every game last season, and there is a lot of confidence in him. But as I mentioned earlier, he did not fully participate in spring ball. He is coming off an off-season elbow surgery from an elbow injury to repair a torn tendon, and he did not fully participate in spring ball. He said at media days that he was feeling good. He believes the elbow is in a good spot without saying it was truly 100%. X said that Lane has thrown fully this summer. That was not happening during the spring, so that's encouraging. But Lane will be on a pitch count during fall camp. How much of a pitch count that will be, how much of a reps restriction, I'm not entirely sure. Kind of need to see that up close and what that's all going to look like. And he said this season he was really pretty blunt about what he was focused on, just taking better care of the ball through a career-high 10 picks last season. So that seems like an obvious deal. And you want to make sure you're stepping up in the pocket to make sure that he was minimizing sack yardage. UNM gave up 34 sacks last season. So Lane certainly dealt with a lot of that last year. As for the others, James Lobstein, as I mentioned, he was UNM's run-first quarterback last season, used in select packages. Extremely effective packages in a lot of respects. I mean, he made some really big plays from really big games. I thought in that kind of vein, it was interesting how Eck talked about Lobstein at media days a couple weeks back in Las Vegas. He said he wants Lobstein to continue to grow as a passer, but he believes his experience last year, just the amount of reps he had gotten compared to when he was in the quarterback competition last year, where he had not played a single real snap under center at the FBS level. Eck believes that experience will really help in the competition last year. And he did push Lane in the competition. It didn't go right down to like the eve of the game or anything like that. But I mean, he did push him. I did think there was about a week or so where I felt it could have gone either way, and then I thought Lane really kind of started to separate himself. Lobstein also trained a lot this offseason. He is technically, he ended last season with expired eligibility. I mean, it was all sapped out. It was done. But he ended up getting a waiver from the NCAA to come back, this year. So this is his 6th year of college football. He trained a lot this offseason, just kind of preparing for the possibility of him maybe being able to come back and the possibility of him pursuing a pro career. So I don't think it's like he's coming in unexpectedly. He didn't know he was going to get this opportunity. He certainly got after it. And I think a lot of the stuff that he wanted that Eck wants him to address, I think he was working on, this offseason, particularly in the passing game. The others, Luke Moga and Toa Fave, both competed during spring ball. We're really the two main guys to watch. Both are dual threat guys. Both are pretty fast. Neither really separated themselves from the other in spring ball. I mean, I think the way Eck kind of put it was, if it's like a polling margin or whatever, it's within like the error. It was really close at the end. And I wrote a column after the spring game that I thought that, really Lane was still the QB1 after all those practices without him really fully participating. I thought Lane was still the guy. Part of that was, if not all of it, was just kind of the inconsistency between the two. I thought there were days where they both looked really good. And you kind of went ahead and said, okay, I really like what I'm seeing here. They really popped in the offense. The dual threat skill set really kind of fed into a lot of the stuff this offense wants to do. And then there were days where they clearly struggled a bit more. I mean, Fave, of course, he threw 4 interceptions during the spring game. Kind of unfortunate for him because that's probably the worst time to throw 4 interceptions in any sort of practice or whatever in spring ball. I think for him, taking care of the ball and his decision-making will probably be a bit of an emphasis. Moga, Eck said that he wants to see him do a better job of balancing, when to stay in the pocket and when to scramble, because there were times where it really seemed like Moga would just kind of take off a little too early. Really wasn't like going through all of the reads to a certain degree, wasn't a super decisive passer. And those were usually the days where things were, not as great as you probably might hope if you're a fan of the team. And there were days though where he was one day in particular towards the end of spring ball where he was just so decisive. He looked really, really confident. He was making a lot of throws. He was extending plays, and it looked really, really good. That was kind of a window into, okay, yes, you see the vision of what a guy, an athlete like this, a quarterback of this caliber, from this recruiting pedigree, what he could do in this kind of offense. I think the way I would put it right now is that Lane's number 1, pretty unquestioned. It's his job to lose. Lobstein's probably 2, in my opinion. I think there's a little bit of a gap, and then I would probably go Moga, and then there's a very tiny, minuscule, teeny tiny gap, and then Fave right there. I think as a 4th guy, I think, frankly, I think a couple, maybe not a couple, but a week of good practice could probably swing Fave up, on the internal depth chart. And I don't think this is going to be a 4-person quarterback competition all the way through. UNM will probably do this. Probably make their decision on starting quarterback earlier than sooner rather than later. That's what they did last year. The kind of the plan there was to make sure that whoever they selected as the as a starting quarterback was going to get enough reps with the first team, the rest of the first team offense to make sure that they were getting all on the same page heading into the season. So I'd probably expect them to make a decision. Probably going into the probably haven't made a decision, probably going into the final week of August, if not even earlier. I think over that course, I don't think it's going to be all 4 guys kind of competing every single day. I do think that, it's going to be Lane and then probably 1 or 2 other guys, just depending on who separates. I don't, again, said it once already, I don't think it's going to be 4 guys all the way through. And then I will add this too. If you listen to the show or you listen to the lives that Grammer and I kind of do, the big picture way that I'm kind of looking at this quarterback competition is that I don't think quarterback is a weakness on this team. I don't think it was a true weakness last year in some respects. Even if you go back and you look at that San Jose State game where, that game that effectively you could probably say maybe kept them out of the Mountain West championship game. I don't think, that was a night where, of course, we're laying through 3 interceptions and all that. I don't think he really lost that game for him because they really struggled to run the ball. They kind of had to throw the ball. And of course, when, you get up to, I think he had, maybe 40, 35 plus at the very least passing attempts that night. I think when that kind of happens and all that, I didn't pin all that on Lane. They were not running the ball. They're not taking care of business in the way that they normally would like to. So again, don't think quarterback was a weakness, but I do think the most clear-cut path to this team reaching its ceiling and achieving its biggest goals, double-digit wins and being ranked in the AP poll, winning a Mountain West championship, making the college football playoff, all that stuff. The most clear-cut path to me is, just better quarterback play, more efficient quarterback play, and perhaps more dynamic quarterback play. That to me is really the way that things, that's what could take this team from pretty darn good to, really kind of brushing the ceiling of greatness so long as the defense doesn't fall off. Now, I do say perhaps more dynamic because I think there's a world where a healthy Lane, if his elbow is all good to go and he's off the pitch count and everything like that, I think there's a world where a healthy Lane is better than he was last year without being a true dual threat guy, an ultra dynamic guy. And I still think there's a world where he can elevate the offense just being who he is and just being more efficient, being more productive. I also think there's a world where, Lobos' team might be a more refined passer than he was, during fall camp last year. And you pair that with what he can do on the run, that kind of heavy metal style run game. I think that could also really help this offense and take it to another level. Similar to Moga and Fave, who give you more speed rather than outright power than Lobstein. I think those guys could also help elevate this offense. I'd probably lean more Moga towards elevating it than Fave at this point, but there's still a lot of football to go in this competition and heading into the season. That's kind of my big picture thought there. I do think if this team is going to achieve what it wants to achieve, all those big, lofty, aspirational goals, I think it's going to be, I think it's probably going to come down to just better quarterback play than last year. Whoever it is, if they don't get it, then that's probably going to be the thing that ends up holding them back in the end. Kind of the other big question I have, I've hammered this one throughout the offseason as well. Who is going to get sacks and or turnovers for this team? Obviously, a really elegant and well-phrased question, of course. But if you've been listening, I've been hammering it all offseason. UNM, of course, does not have Keyshawn James Newby, who was drafted in the 7th round by the Philadelphia Eagles, and Brett Carhu back. Those guys combined for 16.5 sacks last season, nearly half of a league-leading team total of 36. That's a lot of sacks to replace, and I don't think they have to replace every single one of them for this defense to be successful, and I don't think that's how the staff is looking at it either. But this defense does want to stop the run on first down, stop the run on second down, and then they want to absolutely harass the quarterback on third down. I think they're in a good spot overall as a defense to defend the run. And that's not a big question that I have. They got guys back from last year, Brian Booker and J.L. McIver and Xavier Slayton and Darren Agu, who have proven to me that they can be more than adequate run defenders. I mean, that was a good run defense last year in the Mountain West. But I do think they need to identify guys that can help them in terms of, rushing the passer. A couple of the names to run through. Agu, of course. I think he is probably the leader at this point. At least he ended spring as a leader to be UNM's Jack, their boundary end, of course, position that James Newby played last year. Agu, to me, is a different player than James Newby. James Newby was he was a guy that could really bend. He was a real speed rush type. He built his kind of stock to get drafted off of what he can do as a pass rusher, even if he isn't a prototypical kind of NFL body to a certain degree. Agu to me, if you've ever seen him in person, I mean, he's a big dude. He's a thick guy. I mean, he absolutely looks the part. You look at him and you're like, yep, that guy definitely did play in the SEC, and like you kind of understand that because of course he transferred in from Vanderbilt. But I don't think he's as much of a pass rush type, that speed rush type, or maybe even power rush type as James Newby, just from the way that he's kind of built. I think his strength is more defending the run, which I think he's pretty darn good at. That being said, of course, Agu, he had games last year where he was an effective pass rusher and he did get things done in that aspect. So I think he's going to factor in for sure. I don't think, though, he should be thought of as kind of, at least in terms of, rushing the passer and sacks and all that. I don't think he should be thought of as a one-for-one replacement for James Newby. Other guys, in the mix off the edge, Albert Tuicalau, a College of San Mateo transfer. I think I've said on this show and other shows, I really liked what he did during spring ball. I thought he was really effective. He really surprised me. I did not know what to expect out of him. I like the way he bent it. I like the way he bent across over the edge, or around the edge, I should say. And I think he gave some offensive linemen a pretty hard time. I think he's going to be in the mix for a starting spot. I've been very encouraged with what I've seen out of him. Jalen Charles, a Memphis transfer, and Elijah Brody, of course, a local product. They had their springs either cut short or really didn't practice at all. Brody was still kind of, if I remember correctly, coming off of a shoulder procedure when he was during spring ball, and then Jalen Charles, I know for sure, was dealing with concussion towards the back end of spring ball. I think those guys, though, if they're good to go, I think they will contribute. I don't know if they're going to be 100% in the mix for a starting role, but I like what I saw out of Brody last year. I think everything that we've kind of seen with him, though, is that, I thought he was pretty darn good at the early part of the season. Then he had a shoulder injury, and it just kind of wore on him week by week by week by week by week. And that's just not going to work when you're playing that position. So I would like to see him healthy again. And I do think, though, like another offseason under his belt, more time in the weight room, more time getting coached up. I think he's a guy that will be able to contribute there. On the interior, Brian Booker at Mountain West Media Days, he's a preseason all Mountain West guy. In the middle of the defensive line, he very much made it clear that he wants to get more sacks. He felt he left a lot of meat on the table last season, felt that he could add more sacks, more plays. And you saw flashes out last year where he was a good run defender, but there were games like, Boise State, which is a loss for UNM. Booker and Jalen McIver, I felt those guys really turned it up a notch, and just really, really got after it in terms of, bringing heat on the quarterback, from the middle of the defensive line. So, Eck made it clear too that he wants Booker to also, get more pressure on quarterbacks, and I would imagine he has similar expectations for Jalen McIver and Xavier Slayton, a guy who used to be an edge guy. But he's going to fill that Gabriel Lopez. I'm expecting him to fill that Gabriel Lopez type role where you get a guy on the inside who was a bit more of an edge guy like Lopez, but could really out athlete guards and all that. So I think there's similar expectations for them there. We're going to do a lot of reporting on this, but those are probably the guys I'm looking at day one to kind of, be in the mix to bring pressure and figure things out. There is another name that we'll be talking about, not on the defensive line, but will definitely, I think, help bring pressure later in the show. And then as for the turnovers, look, UNM finished -6 in turnover margin last season, which is the 10th worst mark in the Mountain West, and they still won 9 games and, tied for first place in the Mountain West, which is kind of amazing. Eck, also said at media days that, if they finish with a similar turnover margin, they probably will not have a similar level of success as they did last season. And yeah, I think that is pretty simple. Part of that is, the offense taking care of the ball, throwing less picks, less fumbles, all of that. But I think part of it is, UNM at a certain point, really for the first half of the season wasn't doing the greatest job forcing turnovers and, getting picks or knocking the ball out. They even changed their practice schedule to, get more, fumble forcing, circuit drills in there and kind of make that happen. And, they did get better at it, I thought. Towards the end of the year, Austin Brawley coming back made a big difference there. But I would still say I'm probably more focused on the sacks and the turnovers. I think UNM did a pretty decent job forcing turnovers from what I saw during spring ball. And Jameer Torres had like a 3-pick day at one point, which is pretty impressive. And of course, I think it was 5 picks total during the spring game for the defensive team, which I think was the silver team, if I remember correctly. But it's still something that I think needs to be kind of brought up and just monitored really throughout all of fall camp. So sacks probably more, maybe not concerning, but something probably I'll have a little bit more of an eye on, but we'll be definitely monitoring what they're doing with forcing turnovers and limiting turnovers too. Last few questions. I'm just going to breeze through these pretty quickly. What will UNM starting O-line look like? I didn't think this was much of a question at the end of spring ball because you have Caden Robnett back at center. You have, Jamar Tassi at right guard. And then Malik Alian moving in from left tackle. He's going to play left guard this season. And then Tyler Lawrence back at right tackle, and then left tackle. So I was looking hard at left tackle during the spring. I didn't think, and I'm not 100% sure now that lineup gets totally tweaked to a certain degree. But Eck did mention at media days that it's going to be between Weber State transfer Cole Millward, who they brought in specifically to deal with, one of those tackle spots, probably left tackle. Elvin Harris, a guy who's been around the program for a while now. And then, Lawrence for, all of those tackle spots. I didn't, I don't remember it during spring ball. Eck did mention that they're interested in, in probably tweaking it. We're moving Tyler Lawrence over to left tackle, And then, Millward and Harris might be able to compete for right tackle. We'll see how that plays out. I do think it's going to come down to, if I had to make a gut check guess on how it turns out, I would probably go Millward, Alian, Robnett, Tassi, and Lawrence. That's kind of my guess of the situation, but I do think it is a little bit of a question, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that you might get another Jamar Tassi this year, a guy coming in as a true freshman who, gets to camp and all of a sudden it's like, oh, he can really play and really contribute. Who that guy is, I'm not 100% sure yet. We need to get, eyes on camp, eyes on all these guys first, but I would not rule that out by any stretch. I mean, they want to find their best five, and I think we have a good idea of what that five will be at the moment, but I do think it is a bit of a question. Another question, too, one I've been hammering throughout the offseason, who's going to make an impact at receiver, and do they have enough, in terms of receivers and catching the ball? I think they do have enough. I don't look at this receiving group and go wow, they are absolutely loaded. Eck said, Troy O'Meary, the UNLV transfer, of course, that was brought in, kind of a big deal. He's supposed to be the guy that will be their kind of, X-type receiver. And then Miles Williams, really pretty impressive from what I saw, speedy guy. They really liked his burst. An Eastern Washington transfer, he ended up dealing with an injury during the spring, so he was, really held out for the second half of spring. And then O'Meary, he was recovering for an off-season surgery as well, so he never fully practiced during the spring. Eck said both those guys, he's expecting them to be good to go, throughout, fall camp and heading into the season and all that. And I think they really need that because I've had a hard time judging the receivers during spring ball just because they've had so many injuries. UNM missed its, top 7 receivers at certain points, all throughout spring ball. And receiver injuries have been an issue, for as long as Eck has been here. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, this offense, if they're going to get guys like O'Meary healthy, guys like, Miles Williams healthy, Ziel Smith, if he's good to go, Sean Miller, if he takes a step, I think this offense, similar to the quarterback dynamic, I think this offense could really grow, with greater receiver play. And I'm really curious too, to get a better look at a lot of these receivers who aren't early enrollee receivers, I should say, and freshman receivers that were just kind of thrown into the fire during spring. I want to see them a little more comfortable. Guys like Messiah Mingo, who I really liked during spring ball. With a summer to work on stuff, I think he could absolutely challenge for a spot in the rotation. DJ Darling is another early enrollee who I thought did nice things during spring ball, so I want to get eyes on him. Cater Jope is a guy that I don't think fans are thinking of a lot, but I know this staff wants to make sure he's back and healthy. He was expected to be a guy in the rotation last year. Just injuries ended up stacking up, and there was some, just didn't work out that season. So I think they have enough, but I think they need to also kind of prove it on the field. And I think if they do end up dealing with injuries again, I'm curious to see who are the guys that will be able to step up and maybe make a bit of a difference there. I'm also curious if there is a guy that we're not talking about that could surprise us. Like Evan Weissong was a guy that filled in a lot during spring practice because they were down so many guys, and he ended up doing a pretty good job. But then he ended up suffering an injury of his own to end spring practice. So kind of need to see all these guys healthy and out and about and getting after it first. And then final question, not a super pressing question, but I do think it is something that we'll be talking about during fall camp. Who's the third running back? UNM likes to balance its carries out. If there's a guy playing kind of head and shoulders better than the rest of the guys, Damon Bankston, for instance, they'll definitely get a little bit of a lean in reps and carries and targets and all that. And right now they have, I think, a pretty clear top two right now. Scott Trey Humphrey, of course, coming back from a disappointing season last year, and then Cam Matthews, a young running back, Memphis transfer who was absolutely electric during the spring game. I think he had the 69-yard TD, 69-yard TD run. Those are the established 1 and 2. We asked Eck about them at media days. He said that Scott Trey is he's that one guy, and then right behind him is Cam Matthews. So not like maybe a ton of separation, but they both bring something different to the table and different elements of their game that I think UNM will be able to use. The third RB, I would probably guess right now it's going to be Kiefer Sibley at the start of the season. North Texas transfer. I think he got better and more comfortable as spring went on. And I think he had flashes of you give this guy the ball in his hands, like he's going to do some good stuff for you. Eck pointed out though, he's like, he can do that. He can carry the rock. He can make things happen with the ball in his hands, but it's what he's doing without the ball in his hands, those plays, protecting and blocking and all that. That's where he probably needs to get better. So that's something I'm going to look out from. I'm going to look for with him during, fall camp. And Deshaun Buchanan, he suffered a lower body injury during fall camp. I think going into spring ball, I thought of him as kind of the probably the number 2 guy. I don't know if he's going to be ready for the start of the season. Eck at media days said that he was anticipating that he probably would miss some time this season at the start, but he also said, Buchanan had been working really, really darn hard and, wanted to get back as soon as possible. So maybe it's not out of the realm of possibility that he could make it back, but that's remains to be seen. But those are kind of the questions that I have for UNM football. I do have some answers. They may or may not be great. From a tweet I put out before media days, just asked, is there any questions that fans have heading into media days, and what can I answer? So I haven't done those yet, and I wanted to run through a couple here. From Thomas Cerna, shout out Thomas, a very loyal listener to the live shows. What will North Dakota State see as their biggest obstacle moving to the Mountain West? Of course, the Bison are first-year members, making the jump from FCS to FBS after winning, I think, 10 of the last 15 FCS national championships. I think it's just doing what they've done on a week-to-week basis at the FCS level against FBS opponents. Head coach Tim Polisek, when we talked to him at media days, that's what he pointed out too, because NDSU has gone out and not just beaten G6 teams. They've beaten Iowa and Minnesota and Kansas State. But Polisek, a guy that's been around North Dakota State a lot of his professional career, I mean, he made the point, we beat Iowa, but that was like a 6-month game prep. When we were all locked in, that was an aspirational game. We put a lot of time and resources into it that they probably didn't have to put into, playing Indiana State or, Illinois State or something like that. So I think that's probably it, just doing it, and I think that's really probably, Polisek said it himself, but I think that's probably the one thing that, the one thing that they'll probably see as an obstacle, outside of more granular stuff, how is Nathan Hayes going to be in his first year, or do they have enough at receiver and all that? But you could maybe say overall depth too, making the jump from FCS to FBS. But I think this is a fine roster, and frankly, UNM is a a league, expect to be a league contender with like a lot of FCS guys that, guys that were FCS guys, playing at the FBS level. So I think they got good players. I think they got, good coaches and all that. I think it's just going to be, how much of a grind will it be or won't be, playing FBS teams on a week-to-week basis. From Nate, who emailed these questions, for Abraham Williams, what can we expect in his transition from defensive back to wide receiver? He played corner last year. And why was the change made? Does Darren Agu speak with a British accent? And is linebacker Clay Martineau also the transfer you are most excited about? Seems like he should be able to make a huge impact to the defense, taking him one by one. Abe Williams, I wrote about it in the spring after talking to him. He actually requested the move. He did not feel that he was like kind of having fun, frankly, playing corner. He wanted to make that change really mostly out of that. I think the injuries that he suffered last season where, he was, UNM's top corner heading into the season, and then those injuries just kind of wore him down. He missed time. He wasn't able to be the guy in the return game that, UNM was kind of hoping that he would be. This is a guy that was a former FCS All-American as a returner. And that skill set was just not something that we really got exposed to last year. So I think, that's why the change was made. In terms of, what he can do as a receiver, I thought he had some solid days during spring practice. I think he needs more confidence in his hands, probably more than anything. And I'm curious how much better that could have gotten over the summer. I don't know if he's going to be 100% good at the start of fall camp, just because he ended spring practice with an injury. I think it was a sprain though, so I don't think it's something that would have like kept him out for the entire summer. I'm just not 100% sure right now, but regardless, I do think he has a steeper hill to climb to be a guy in this kind of receiver rotation. This is maybe last year he would have got pressed into action more. Because that was a thinner receiver room. They were not playing a lot of guys by any stretch. But this year, I think they want to play more guys, especially with no red shirts and all that with the young guys, so they don't have to worry. So I think it's still a steep hill for him to climb. As for Martineau, former 4-star prospect, Boise State transfer. He is probably not the transfer I'm most excited or interested to see. I've already seen part of him already, but most excited about, I should say it in the vein of the question. I still think that mantle probably goes to Troy O'Meary. I mean, I am excited and really interested in seeing him full go, ready to rock, because I think he could give this offense another edge. But I do think, I touched on it earlier and kind of referenced him without saying his name. Martineau, I think the plan for him is still, for him to bring value as a pass rusher, kind of sub him in on third downs and just let him rip and roll. That was something they were doing a lot during the spring, something, Spence Nowinski, the defensive coordinator, kind of talked about, something Eck kind of talked about. So I do think that's probably where he's going to be given the first crack to provide value. If there are injuries in the linebacker room, maybe there is a chance for him to, kind of sneak in and become a top 4 guy there. I don't think the path for him becoming a top 4 guy is all that convoluted either. But I don't know. I would probably want to see a little bit more of him as a stand-up backer. But to me, the guy that really flashed and I really liked at backer outside of Jackson Eck and Mercury Swaim, of course, during spring ball was Nick Wheeler. I thought he did some really nice things, and I think he's going to be in a spot where he will be able to contribute. But no doubt, Martineau is very athletic, very talented, and if he can give them value as a pass rusher, I think that's going to work out really well. And one more from Freddie Trujillo, another loyal listener. Said he doesn't have a question for media days, but I'm curious to know if you think these media day formats are outdated, as Pac-12 fans are alleging, and do you think their upcoming glorified Teams/Zooms presentations will have any merit? Would media/bowl committee members tune into them? I think media days are a little outdated in the sense that probably not too long ago, but it's certainly, getting longer by the day. Media days probably provided a lot more value in the sense of, you show up to media days as a reporter and there's a table where there's a bunch of, team packets with rosters and stats and all this stuff. that you probably weren't able to access entirely online at the time. So you went to media days and you got all the updated rosters and, oh, this guy's on this team, and oh, like I have these stats now. So even just showing up and getting like those things in order provided more value. I don't think that's really the case anymore. I mean, some places, some programs, UNM as of 2 years ago, like they still waited to update their rosters until media days. I mean, that's when they would drop kind of the full, hey, this is what's going to be heading into fall camp. They haven't done it the last 2 years. And most teams have kind of cut that out. And of course, all the stuff that I mentioned that would be in those media days packets, you would be able to find, that, online and all that. And I do think the Mountain West, in my opinion, does a pretty good job of making coaches available for, coaches and players for very reasonable windows. I don't think you're able to get a lot of these guys. I think you can get one-on-ones with these guys. I don't think you're always able to get as much as you probably used to in this format. So that probably kind of cuts down the connections and all that. But probably an outdated format. It's probably going to go away, I would maybe guess, in the next 15 years, or maybe just go all online. But at the same time, there's a lot of power for, conferences, the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, that will absolutely, they will spend a good chunk of money on the event and, get the commissioner out there and really kind of put things out there as well. And there are media members that, as long as they're doing it, that will cover it. So outdated or not, I still think as a conference and as a media member, I still think that both, that conferences and media members, I should say, like still find value, in what, in that format as well. And, I have seen, Pac-12 fans, say like, they're outdated, like, they're going to go anyways. I don't know if I necessarily disagree. I do think it was a miscalculation or a misfire, if whatever you want to call it, on the Pac-12 to not have media day this year. I mean, you're debuting a new conference. It's a new era for the Pac-12. Why you didn't get everybody in the same room and take the group picture and have the commissioner come up and talk glowingly about the new era? I just don't know. I mean, they said I heard at least one person from the league itself say it was like a cost-cutting move. I don't know how expensive media days really need to be, frankly. But I think it was a misfire to not do it this year for the Pac-12. If they wanted to can it after this year, whatever. But this year, I think they should have done it. And then as for like the Zoom and team presentations that, might replace media days in the future, or at least even right now in some cases, I think they have merit. I mean, I think if you go into the mindset as like a media member of like, I'm going to get something out of this, I'm going to ask for it, then yeah, I think they provide merit. And at that point, they're pretty easy and pretty cost effective. So media days overall, probably a little bit outdated. In their current format, I don't know if they're all going to go away, too soon, but they probably are on their way out the door, at least in this current format. Those are the questions. Those are the answers for today. Thank you for listening to me yap for a period of time that I am not quite certain, but we're hoping to have this episode out before the start of spring ball, so I'm hoping you're listening to it now as a preview. But before we wrap things up, as always, I want to encourage you guys, if you like this show, if you like any of our podcast content, please subscribe to the YouTube. Please give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that. Anything you can do to, to kind of support us in that, that way, it makes doing these podcasts a lot easier. Recommend sharing them on social media, sending them to your buddies in the group chat or whatever. Recommend, doing all of that because that definitely helps us on our end. Jeff Grammer and I are also back on a weekly schedule every Tuesday. About 2 p.m. is what we're shooting for our weekly live shows where we engage a few guys who take all your questions. We really enjoy it. We love the format. We're excited to be back. And we're going to have a lot to talk about, man. I mean, it's a big season for football. It's a big season for basketball. And we're really looking forward to, getting in there and discussing it. And we're going to have a guest on next week as well from UNM's football program. And hoping to get more guests in general on the live shows as well. And I'm hoping to get some more guests on the pod as well. But today, you had to put up with me yapping, but I appreciate you for tuning in and encourage you guys to subscribe and support the product.